Okay, I think we're going. I think we're good there. I think the gram should be going here in just a second.
God, so
Don't you
good.
don't you hate it when I woke up this morning, turned over to see what time it was? It was like 6:15, I think.
Yeah.
And but I didn't know that because my phone had not charged all night.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I don't even know. I don't even know. Somehow, some way, it just didn't charge. So I'm gonna have to do. I do have enough charge though to send it out to our group.
Okay.
So let me get over here and I'll go through and start. Oops, I gotta switch. Gotta switch. I've been battling a little. I don't know, man. A little sickness the last couple days.
Man, you know what's so crazy? We had so I was Thursday, Illinois, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday in Oxford. I hit
Yeah,
Louisville, went between Louisville and Cincinnati,
yeah.
and I sneezed twice. And by the time I got home, my nose felt like it was like I didn't have any of this. I didn't have any of this like clogged. Like there's no, if I blew my nose right now, it wouldn't do anything.
Right.
But it's like, man, it just feels like something's about 2:00 in the morning, 3:00. I got up. It felt like somebody had stuffed cotton up my nose secretly in the middle of the night. And so
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Mine started like my nose started running on our flight. We were in Virginia Beach this weekend. Pastor
right.
Chad Douglas, shout out to New Life and that great church. And
Yeah.
so on the way out there, I told my wife, I'm like, man, I just like it's just running like crazy. And so trying to figure out what I was going to take. And so finally got some Dayquil, which worked. And then, bro,
Yeah.
okay.
Because that's that decongestant.
Yeah. So here's the deal. So
Yeah.
Dayquil made me feel better. I got home Friday night. I got back to the hotel Friday night, and I made the mistake. I took a NyQuil,
Oh
bro.
no.
I
Oh
woke
no.
up. I woke up. I mean, when I tell you I woke up loopy on Saturday morning, holy moly, man! NyQuil
Did you
rocks
wake
my
up?
world.
Yeah, you woke up feeling like somebody turned your brain into marshmallow syrup for like it's like
Absolutely,
you're like
absolutely. And then I had to go and exactly. We had a meeting with some of their leaders and potential leaders and whatever. And I was like, I told him, I'm like, bro, my brain is it's just mush, just
yeah.
complete mush right now.
Anything that I say cannot be held against me.
Absolutely.
The opposite of the Miranda,
That's
the
right.
anti-Miranda.
The anti-Miranda.
Is that what's called? The Miranda Act or Miranda rights, or that's what it's
Miranda.
called?
Yeah. Right. Where they tell you, yeah, you have the right to remain silent. Right.
Yeah, I think that's it. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. It's like the anti-Miranda. If anybody's out there by the name of Miranda, that's not. We're
We're
not.
not anti-Miranda.
No, not at all. We just sometimes based on the context of the Miranda acts. If you've taken NyQuil in the middle of the night, you need an anti-Miranda read to you.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
You have the right to say anything you want to. What you say won't be held against you in a court of public opinion. That's it. It's anti-Miranda.
Man. And you know,
Hey,
so like
that's a lying bunch of baloney, bro.
that's
I'm telling you
exactly
right
what that
now.
is.
We know, we know. That's why people don't. Hey, that's why people don't want to preach conferences. Like when you're young, you're like, I would love to preach at big conference, and then all of a sudden, as you grow up, you hear the chatter behind the scenes, and then
Yeah.
as guys get older, be like, I don't want to preach none of that stuff. I don't want them sitting eating a steak and breaking down everything I said and talking about how
Right.
dumb it was.
Right, right. And if God forbid you dare say something stupid, it is forever
Mhm.
preserved out there.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. All right, I think I've got Let me look real quick here, make sure. I think we're rocking and rolling, bro. I think we're good. It's not bad, not bad. Little late start today. You were
Man, I
getting
was just,
after it.
I know, I was doing, so our podcast today, it required a lot more, research than just simply taking a topic and dividing the topic down to,
Yeah.
digestible pieces. It required a lot of, so anyway, I looked up and I started about 7 and I looked up and it was like 8:30 and I'm like, oh, shoo, I got to put this into, so.
Yeah, Chad Douglas asked me, "What's our normal show prep like?" And I'm like, "Well, we just we want it to be just in time conversation. We want to model what it's like just to be able to talk about topics and issues, whatever."
Yeah.
So there's usually our
Yeah.
usually our show prep is this is what we're gonna talk about. What do you think? And
Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
just go from there. This one's gonna be a little bit different because it's got some information from a resource, and so we're gonna have a little bit more of a show prep here. So I think we're
Here.
ready though, bro. You ready
I
to
got
go?
you. Yeah.
What'd
I
you
got you back. See that text? I got your back.
do?
I said,
You
that's
did.
what,
You did.
yeah. I said, that's what we do right there, really. Like,
That's awesome. That is phenomenal. That is phenomenal. I'm sure Chad will appreciate that. So, all right, let's go live. You ready to rock and roll?
let's go.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And we got a great again, man. It's crazy the diversity of platforms.
Yep.
People are watching different platforms. So,
Yeah.
got a good group on Twitter, good group on Facebook, and a couple jumping on YouTube, and some jumping on the Instagram, which is amazing. So
Golly.
that's awesome. We appreciate everybody jumping on, being a part. So here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham alongside my big brother Ken Dillingham Jr. the third, back from some travel. You weren't even supposed to be here today,
I know. I
but
wasn't.
commitment. You're just ridiculously committed to the
I know.
podcast
I left
and the
from Oxford,
coaching.
Mississippi. We had breakfast at 10:30 and I left from Oxford, Mississippi. I went and had breakfast with Pastor Nate Rios
Come on,
and
somebody.
great
The
church, great
legend.
man. Yeah. The man, the myth. And so we had, so we had a quick breakfast. I met him at 10:30. I got in the truck, headed out, got home last night about 8:30. That's not bad.
That's pretty awesome. That is
Was
pretty
it 8?
awesome.
Yeah, 8:30, but that's a time change.
Oh, yeah, right.
So it was, so with all my stops and everything, it was only about 8 hours and 45 minutes.
That's
Or
not bad.
no. It was 8 hours and 30 minutes with all my stops and whatever. Never ate, never nothing.
Just get in the car and just go. That's the way to do it, man. That's the way to get it done. That's awesome. Well, we're glad you made it back, and big shout out to Nate Rios. We've given him a shout out before, but he's got a great clothing suit line called
Oh
Blue
yeah.
Thread Project. He is the clothier. Would that be the right
The
term? The
official
suit maker,
clothier. The official clothier.
right?
Yeah.
Of athletes and big time passers like yourself, and great
Custom, bespoke, custom, all
custom,
custom, custom
amazing.
shirts, custom suits. He does. He's got several. He's got Big Ten schools. He's got SEC schools. He's got professional
Yeah.
athletes.
Jim Harbaugh, I think, had one of his suits on at one of the press conferences recently.
Good.
So big time shout out to our network member, Nate Rios, playing at Church, Oxford, Mississippi. So appreciate him. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a travel. We got back, great time in Virginia Beach with our guy Chad Douglas, doing a great job. New Life Virginia Beach, Ken, is one of the greatest churches, man. It's an amazing thing. They have a great discipleship culture. It's pretty awesome.
NLVB.
Come on, somebody.
New Life, Virginia Beach.
That's it.
Hey, by the way, I haven't
Yeah.
even had a chance to tell you, but Nate Rios's nonprofit, Blue Ribbon Life.
Yeah.
He's met with some key people about some national programs for the national public school education system. And he's hosting a conference and wants us to co-sponsor the Dillingham Group and be keynote speakers alongside guys like the baseball coach for Ole Miss and a bunch of,
Let's
so
go. That's
it's gonna be
amazing,
on
bro.
Ole Miss University. So I haven't got a chance to tell you about it, but it's a pretty cool deal.
That's awesome,
Yeah.
dude. That's awesome, man. Yeah, Rios is a go-getter, man. He's out there in the community and
Yep.
making a big time impact. So
Yeah.
pretty awesome. So, all right, we got a big topic. I do want to give a big shout out to real quick
Ooh.
to our post production producer,
Oh,
Reese Dog
yes.
Dillahan. Give a big shout out to him because updated bumper music.
Yes. Sounds good, man. It's fresh.
Yeah, it's fresh,
It's
man.
fresh.
Fresh. And also, while we're doing shout outs, I
Oh,
feel like
boy.
a DJ.
Oh, yes.
Just send in your shout outs here to Ken and Chris in the morning. So
Got a birthday over here.
that's right.
Sending
We
out
got
happy birthday wishes to.
happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday to Peggy in Pulaski, Michigan.
So good, man. That's so awesome. We do have birthday shout outs though. Big time shout out to
Oh,
Kaylin.
you were going birthday?
I was going birthday, bro. You didn't even know it.
I
See,
did.
that's just how you flow,
I'm
man. That's
sorry,
just how
man.
you flow. Birthday shout out in Beaver Creek. Shout out to Kaylin Haltom
Yeah.
and also Rhett Dillingham. Big
Yeah.
birthdays. I don't know. They probably don't care. We won't tell how old they are.
Oh, I don't think they would care.
Yeah.
Well, they may. We better ask them. I don't know if I think there's some kind of like a parental HIPAA thing on
Yeah,
that.
we better just suffice it to say happy birthday
Exactly.
to them. So
It's the weirdest deal too, by the way, those, man, lest we get sidetracked today, because we have a
here we
topic
go.
that's a fire, but it is so weird that our kids have two uncles, Chris
Yes.
and Chris. They have our firstborns both share the same birthday. Your kids have two uncles, Ken and Ken.
Ken and Ken.
Bro, it's weird.
It's
It's
wild.
almost like Rod Serling wrote our genealogical script.
The Twilight Zone.
Oh, Sheila Campbell DeBoard said, "Happy 25th birthday, Galen."
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely. Well done.
yes,
Well
yes,
done.
yes.
Oh, we didn't do Kimba Starkey.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You better give us a little shout out on the weather report today before we get into the topic. Can you give us a little radio voice here?
Chief Meteorologist Ken Bastarkey checking in today. He says that the weather is going to be good today, 66 degrees currently with a high reaching 79 degrees, might get to 80 if we're lucky. Thank you, Chief Meteorologist Ken Bastarkey.
There we go. So we got birthday shout outs, we got the weather report. Oh, we're missing a little traffic. Little traffic report on the nines.
Beep, beep, beep. The little background stuff that they have here.
We have the helicopter sound in the background.
That's what I started saying my sound effects followed by today's traffic brought to you by the Roadrunner. Beep, beep.
That's awesome. Oh man,
that's the worst. That's the worst sound effect. It's about like it's like my beatboxing. My beatboxing and my sound effects both sound like 1970s cartoons.
Oh man, that's so awesome. I got a little beatbox I do that my kids just absolutely hate, and I do it on purpose because it's so awesome that they hate it. So
Yeah.
it's pretty awesome. So, and ladies and gentlemen, this is how we get sidetracked right there.
Yes, but it's so fun though.
We were loaded and ready to go, man. All right.
Around and around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel.
Oh, no. Pawpaw would be so proud right now, dude. You know how proud Pawpaw would be that you just did that. That is amazing. We heard that every time we went to Pawpaw's house.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, let's roll because we got a
Let's
big time
go.
topic today. This is
Yeah.
big time. This is serious, Ken. We gotta get
I
locked
know.
in. We gotta
I
get
know.
locked in and get serious here.
Serious Ken, beautiful Ken. We've got all kinds of stuff going today.
Something like that. All right, so what we wanna talk about today is we want to dive into, an article written by, Daniel Yang,
Mhm.
who is the director of the Send Institute, which is a partnership between the North American Mission Board and the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. And the title of the article was Four Trends Shaping Church Planning and Growth Through 2050. So
Mhm.
we want to kind of just break down the information from this article.
Okay.
And the article is what it is. So we're going to kind of break down the information from the article. And then from that, kind of have a conversation, Ken, of just how that affects
Yeah.
or just kind of our view and perspective on some
Yeah.
of the information that's provided there, and I think it really feeds into a lot of why we do what we do, and
Mhm.
as I was going through this, it just reinforced a lot of things that I feel like God has led us to about church planning versus trend chasing and some of that kind of stuff. And so I'm gonna let you that you've been deep diving into this stuff. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
let you kind of start walking us through. We wanna so for people that are regular listeners or watchers, kind of how we go back and forth a little bit. But what we want to do is today is kind of really walk through this
Yeah.
article, kind of stick to that, and then have a discussion about the information that came from that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, as you mentioned, that Daniel Yang is the director of the Send Institute, and that I think it is interesting to me that as we look at that that partnership between North American Mission Board, the Billy Graham Center of Evangelism. I think it's the Billy Graham Center, but it is the emphasis is Billy Graham Center of Evangelism at the Wheaton College. And so the article is from a life. It's a Lifeway Research Group um, article from the research of Daniel Yang and some of these other groups, and it emphasizes what they call the 2050 factor. And the 2050 factor basically, um, it is a demographic. It's a demographic assessment of what's coming in America that deals with that the demographics in America are diversifying rapidly, and so the 2050 factor is saying that very soon, for the first time since our country's founding,
Yeah,
white Americans will comprise less than half of the total U.S. population. So the nation's leading demographer from the Brookings Institute, William Fry, said that this could happen as early as 2045. So we could potentially be within 20 years. And I like this. This is a quote. This is a direct quote, but it said, while demographics aren't destiny,
yeah,
the large shifts, especially the new complex dynamics of urban and suburban contexts, and the increasing diversity of local neighborhoods and communities has a huge implication for how church planting is being conceptualized for a new generation. And I think that's huge because, as we're going to see here in just a moment, we're going to walk through these four trends that he highlights, the four trends that are going to that are either responding to or going to be affected by this
yeah,
2050 factor. I think this is important because, as we're going to talk about, there was a day when church planting was based on sort of finding a niche demographic and kind of going after that. So, anyway, Fry's book, Diversity Explosion, this is his book, How New Racial Demographics Are Remaking America, provides watershed insight and implications for organizations concerning how they can embrace and adjust to this oncoming reality. In it, he says, quote, I'm convinced that the United States is in the midst of a pivotal period, ushering in extraordinary shifts in the nation's racial demographic makeup. if planned for properly, these demographic changes will allow the country to face the future with growth and vitality as it reinvents the classic American melting pot for a new era. And of course, he's not talking about church planting. He's just
Yeah.
a demographer. But
Right.
anyway, so it's from that platform, though. I guess that's from that pool of information, research about, okay, so then, all right, based on these things, based on the 2050 factor,
Yeah.
what about church planting will change, and what about it do we need to look forward and make some proactive changes? And that's what we're going to discuss here in these next this next little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's, you know, as I was kind of thinking through that, the diversity, local neighborhoods and communities, how that has implications for church planting. And I
Oh,
was just kind of thinking, I was kind of thinking that through that, there are still some pockets in some places, and we'll talk more about church planting here in just a minute, but
yeah,
some pockets where, there's a certain expectation. There's even though we live in a postmodern culture, you still have certain places that
yeah,
a post-Christian culture, there's certain places that still have a Christian foundation,
yeah.
for the most part. And so you still have kind of those people. But if you look at what's happening in urban areas,
Oh my goodness.
it's a
Shoot.
totally different dynamic. And so if you
Yeah.
live in the Midwest and you live in kind of, the Bible Belt or some of those regions, it can feel like, well, this is what America is. But the reality is what I'm reading in this, Ken, is that the rest of America is gonna start looking more like the urban areas
Hmm.
in every place rather than kind of the traditional Americana that, the
So true, dude.
right?
So true. Jared Staten comes in. He's he's projecting, he's extrapolating from our introductory comments. And he makes a great observation. He said he calls it the post tradition era. He
Yeah,
said we won't be able to rely on traditional church ideology to reach people, and that's where we're going, and that's where the article's going. But I think, but I do think that you make some really, really astute observations there, as you're often wont to do. Um, and that is that in quantitative analysis, you always remove the extremes at both ends,
sure.
or it's a common practice to remove the extremes at
Yeah,
both ends,
right.
so that you're not, so that you're not, that your mean results aren't skewed
Yeah, it
by
reflects.
potential,
Yeah,
by potential extreme outliers. So
sure.
like for example, I mean, you may look at places like New York or Los Angeles, or really huge metropolitan areas, and I mean, they, in many of those places, they've probably reached the 2050 factor in like 2010,
Sure. Yeah,
so and so that, so like you said, there's going to be probably some of those outliers that are, like New York, Miami, even Houston, places like Houston,
San
LA,
Francisco.
San Francisco, some of these places, I think Chicago, these places, they obviously weight the trend in a certain direction,
Yeah,
but then like you said, then you come to the Midwest. So obviously it's not like that this is going to be that it's not, this isn't going to all be put in, the US population isn't all going to be put in a bag, shook up and distributed equally across all
right.
50 states. We understand that. So, but for, as a general rule, this is what they're talking about. We're not, this isn't our idea, the 2050 factor. This is Daniel Yang. This is Wheaton College, the North American Missions Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. This is his article. So that's, we're using his observations and then making commentary off of that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let's kind of go through this because I want to keep an eye on the time to make sure we're able to dive through
Let's
it and
do
get
it.
to the conclusions.
Let's go.
So let's start with the first piece, Ken.
Mm,
The 1980 versus 2050. The observations that he makes about church planting, and how we're closer to 2050 than we are 1980. So talk to us through that just a little bit.
I love that he started here.
Hmm.
I love that he started here because I think that what he's doing is he's actually using this number 1980 as a kind of a watershed moment when Rick Warren planted Saddleback Church.
Sure.
And
No
regardless of what
doubt.
right, regardless of what you think about Rick Warren, the purpose-driven life stuff was massive. And
Absolutely.
and this
Best-selling book next to the Bible, I
it's
think. Like,
crazy.
it's right,
Yeah.
right up
Yeah,
there.
what, like 20 million copies sold or something? I don't know
Yeah.
how many. But I think it is important when we look at that also the Saddleback Church, in 1980 when Rick Warren planted the Saddleback Church, it was kind of a new paradigm of how to engage the unchurched and the dechurched in a world of church planting models in a world where classic mainline Protestant churches were in serious decline in their missional effectiveness.
Mhm.
So I think that's really cool that he uses um, while he uses the Rick Warren the 1980 model, but I love how he says, although we fall in love with the model and say, oh, that's where we should be at. We should
Mhm.
be. I mean, Rick Warren found the secret sauce, and what Yang is saying is, well, for the North American church planting model, Rick Warren found the secret sauce for a 1980 demographic, but we're closer to 2050 than we are 1980.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And man, there's so many like the difference of culture and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of what Rick Warren was doing. I know his goal wasn't to reach churched people, but it was mostly to reach, even though they weren't church people, they still had some Christian background or whatever, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. So the statement that Yang makes, um, I want you to kind of talk about this for just a second. Yang says, while we are extremely thankful, should rightfully honor the creativity and faithfulness of church planting innovators over the last several decades. We're at a point now where an honest examination of our existing models and systems should be made in light of the fast changing culture and demographics. We simply aren't in a 1980 kind of world anymore. So talk to us about that, Ken.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I think that's so profound. I think that the 2050 factor is saying that. I mean, obviously, there's some things that the article doesn't it doesn't really take a deep dive into, but it does sort of suggest,
Agree.
you know,
I was thinking the same thing. There's some places where there's little less meat on the bone, but
yeah.
kind of make some observations and statements without
Mhm.
some other information. But this is kind of one of those.
So yeah, so I think what he's suggesting is that so what's going to affect the 2050 factor? What's going to make that what is going to make that unique? And I think that it is unique in the sense that um, I think just because racial demographic, this is interesting because it really requires a lot of nuance to really discuss this honestly and with integrity because you you could say there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of immigrants who aren't white. I mean, that's so the 2050 factor is that by the year 2050, white Americans will be less than 50% of the population. Well, you may look at that and say, well, how does that demographic have anything to do with, you know, um, the socio-religious complexion of the demographic? It's the complexion of skin, maybe it might be the complexion of
Yeah,
culture,
right.
but it's not how's that complexion of socio-religious um, uh, uh, kind of kind of face of America
Right, and he
in that
didn't
time frame.
dive into what the demographic is shifting towards. I mean, you can
Yeah,
make some
right.
assumptions probably with
Yeah,
some of the border conversations and whatever, and that
yeah,
the implications that that could have on
yeah.
church and Christianity.
South Americans may influence it toward a heightened desire for for Christianity. I
Yeah,
mean, it may actually dilute secularism. Interestingly, and so it does, but at the core, I think this is what's so huge is the it's investigating how this affects church planting
yes,
because because
yes.
it's not. So in Rick Warren's 1980, it was suburban Los Angeles
Yes.
Californians who had some religious background, but were either one generation away from people who faithfully attended church, or they had become disheartened with dying mainline Protestantism, and so they had left that. And so Rick Warren was saying, "Hey, we got something new. Come back." Or we've got something, we want you to take a look at this. This is Christianity packaged in a new way.
Yeah.
And so church planting in many ways is an investigation of how can we package it? How can
Yes.
we posture it in a way to attract people, this is an attractional
That's what I
conversation.
was gonna say. Yeah, it was the rise of attractional church model,
Yeah.
even though it wasn't probably called that in the moment. That's what it
Yeah.
ultimately evolved into.
Yeah. So let's just jump into the four rising tides from Yang's article. I think
Yeah.
the first one there, multi-ethnic churches and leadership. I think obviously, I think this speaks exactly to a rising immigrant population, and not just a rising immigrant population, but the decreasing whiteness of America.
Yeah.
And so multi-ethnic churches. So here's his first observation. The first observation is trends are moving toward, or will, they either are or will shift toward multi-ethnic churches and multi-ethnic leadership. So he makes the statement that in 1980, most church plants were demographically homogenous. I think this is huge.
Yes.
He doesn't say this. Okay, so let me be fair. He doesn't say this. This is me taking his information and extrapolating from it why what was church planting in Rick Warren's 1980.
Yeah.
So 1980 versus 250 or 2050. The 1980 model, most church plants were demographically homogenous, focusing on a particular subset of their planting area, right? These church plants focused on predominant demographic and then tailored their programs, their messaging, their services for that group. Like, for example, if a church was going to start in a suburban area, it was probably going to focus predominantly on middle class families. It was going to
Yeah.
have youth group, children's ministry. It was going to have,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. So it was almost, church planting was almost, Rick Warren's model was almost a demographic structuring to reach a particular subset of people. And Chris,
It
there's a lot
literally was that.
that was literally, I mean, from like 1980 to literally like 20 till COVID, like from 1980 to COVID for 40 years, what was communicated was you got to find your people that you're going to reach. You can't, nobody can really effectively reach all different cultures because there's so much differentiation between style. One group likes a certain style of music, another group doesn't really like that style of music. So it's really difficult to, some like sort of more country and Western style music, and some like more pop style music. And so if you make your music one way or the other, traditional versus contemporary. And so all of the conversation for like 40 years was, you need to have a church that finds that particular homogenous demographic and go after it and just say, that's what we're going after. And he's saying that's not going to be the same.
Right. That's literally what Rick Warren did. I can't remember what it was called. Was it like Saddleback Sam or something like that, where
Yeah.
they
This is our person that we're going after. Yeah.
they
Right.
identified who the people were in their area, and this is the person that we're gonna target, and then we're gonna build all of our exactly what he said, the programs, the messaging, everything is built around that particular person, which, I mean, obviously you gotta know your community. We're not suggesting that,
Yeah.
but what we're seeing now is that it's increasingly more multi-ethnic, which
Uh-huh.
means the church should reflect that. It means that the leadership should reflect that, which I think is a really, really
Yeah.
important piece. I do think Jay Jones, made a great point. It's healthy for church to reflect demographics if its regions as a baseline, hard to be multi-ethnic when your community is mono-ethnic. I think again, we're going to kind of dig through this and talk about, we want to kind
I
of
like
lay
his
this out.
word mono-ethnic.
Right, exactly. And so I
Yeah,
think sometimes again, we're going to talk about trend chasing and some of that kind of stuff here in just a minute. We're just going to run through what his four rising tides from Yang's article.
yeah,
So what he's saying is, where in 1980 it was specifically targeted to a specific
yeah,
demographic, and that's what the church looked like. In 2050, because of the demographics, it's going to be more
yeah,
multi-ethnic,
yeah.
and that should be reflected in the church and in leadership. So
Yeah, can you look at your text? I sent you a text. I sent Saddleback Sam. Can you put that in the comments?
I sure can.
Because, dude, I mean, that's so hilarious. Like literally they had Saddleback Sam, and it was an image of, it says, it had like bullet points, and it pointed to him, and it was like, he is well educated, he likes his job, he likes where he lives, he thinks he's enjoying life now more than he did 5 years ago. He's self-satisfied, even smug about his station in life. Health and fitness are his priority. I mean, it's unbelievable that they literally had a person that was like, this is our demographic target. Saddleback Sam is who we're
Mhm.
going after.
Right.
And so I think it's just, man, great. Again, the astute observations that you're often wanting to do in these it's unbelievable. I did so much of the research, and then you just make the brilliant observations as we move along. So
I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm pretty proud of myself that I pulled out Saddleback Sam. I couldn't remember that that's exactly what it was, but
it is
that's what I
exactly
thought,
what it
so
is. And
that's
and
awesome.
and and
I'm
I
working on
think
trying to
just
put that in there, so,
okay.
by the way.
And I think that that image just so speaks to the idea that said it was a homogenous, you have to go after this homogenized target to have a successful church plant. All right, so Daniel Yang's um, second observation of the four that you just talked about. The second of the four is micro networks and partnering churches. He says that these networks and partnerships of various backgrounds are connecting and partnering to bring their particular area of emphasis to bear on a more diversified approach, from ideas to funding to leadership structure. This is so true. We're watching this happen, dude.
Yeah.
We've seen this in some of the things that you and I have been invited to, as sort of representative the Dillingham Group, representative the Mobilized Church Network. We've been asked into some of these places, some of these conversations. In fact, Chris, you and I were invited as a part of a cohort that traveled across the country and had these conversations that we literally ended up at Saddleback's campground having the discussions. This is interesting, having these discussions. And one thing that we saw was in this discussion was how that these micro networks and partnering of diverse churches is so crazy. And I just think that, it's so profound, and it's happening. And I think it's interesting because I had a conversation with Pastor Nate Rios, who's a church planter, and he was mentioning about, he was mentioning about in our particular tribe, there are certain micro groups that are like parachurch ministries and micro groups that are that are focused on helping church planting, but they really don't come from a church planting background. Really, they come from a resourcing background.
Mhm.
And so they have a lot of the resources about church planting, but they don't have a lot of the answers. And he said, like, you and your brother have a lot of the answers about church planting, which I don't, that was his comment, not mine. But he said, but don't have a lot of resources. And so this is a thing with this micro networks.
Yeah.
So you've got these micro networks that are coming together saying, hey, you guys have a lot of structural ideas about, what these answers might be. We represent a lot of larger, more closer to the 1980 Saddleback Sam style church with a lot of resources. How can we partner to really be successful.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this, particularly outside of the apostolic church. We're
Yes.
seeing this a lot. And my prayer is that with a lot of humility, that within the apostolic church, a lot of these, uh, parachurch micro networks would literally start coming together and say, "Hey, look, let's bring what we're good at to bear on making a solution."
Man, absolutely. I definitely, like you said, we've had opportunities to be in some of those conversations, whatever, and like you said, outside of the apostolic movement, that definitely seems to be a trend.
Mhm.
And I think they're wrestling through a lot of the things that we do and will wrestle with, as far as like you have a certain angle and a certain slant on something, and so that becomes your focus. Then you get like 5,000 different things, whatever. And I do think coming together, particularly as it pertains to the mission, that's one of the things that I think, again, just as an observer, right? Laying everything else aside and just saying, okay, I say everything, I'm not talking about doctrine. I'm just saying, like, laying
Mhm.
personal opinions and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff
Yeah.
aside
Yeah.
and saying, look,
Personal bias.
yeah, how do we put our attention and focus on the mission, and how do we help others engage in this and be a part of that? And here's the deal, and this is not a shot or a slam or anything,
No,
but we know
just
that
observations.
this is just an observation. The larger institution is inherently less nimble. It's less flexible. It can't, like, there are necessary bureaucracy things that have to be in place and whatever,
Mhm.
versus the smaller allows churches and church plants and these networks to be more nimble, to be more flexible, to be more adaptable in the moment, what's going on. So I'm not, this is, again, not a shot at the organization or anything like that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
these micro networks, smaller groups allow more flexibility, more adaptability in the moment, addressing, current issues and trends right now, rather than kind of have to go through that
Yeah.
process. So
I
definitely
think
see it
that's
happening.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and it's important for us to, I think, to acknowledge, like, as you're talking about, like, I think, if you look at organizations like the Southern Baptist Convention, or you look at, the United Pentecostal Church that we're associated with, or whatever, that those larger organizations, those denominations are predominantly, right? They're predominantly about, they're just geared to be about self advancement and self preservation. They're like they're there to sort of preserve, and they advance. But like you said, it's not about. I think at the end of the day, the goals are the same. It's just that, like you said, what would happen if? And I think like in the Southern Baptist Convention, you've seen this a little bit, and we only know this because this is the stuff, like, we're missiologists, like, so this is,
Yeah.
and this
Yeah.
is what we study. We're not saying that they, when we talk about what when we make these kind of observations, we're not making observations about doctrinal accuracy. We're not making
No.
observation. No, this is not implied in toto. This is something that is just, it's an observation that says that they've made a shift in some ways, and and I think the United Pentecostal Church is also making a shift in some ways, to begin to sort of recognize and leverage these smaller micro networking groups that are just, they're more nimble, and they're more where it's happening.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
so the third one that we're going to hit, the third point
Why don't you
is,
hey, why don't you hit 3 and 4 together?
okay.
Because I think they kind of connect a
Yeah.
little
Okay.
bit.
Okay.
So why don't you do 3 and 4 together? Because I wanna make sure we have time.
For the end. Okay. All right. So the third and fourth are, Uh, number three is, there's a shift. There is starting to be, and there will be more and more, a shift from a service launch model to a community engagement model. Okay, this is Daniel Yang's wording.
This is his wording.
He said, as indicated before, much of church planting over the last 40 years was focused on training church planters on how to start seeker friendly corporate worship gatherings in communities that were underserved by existing churches. This style of a church plant tended to grow rapidly as it reached a community within a very similar demographic. That relates to sort of that homogenous piece that we just talked about.
Mhm.
It identified the cultural barriers that kept a group from attending church and created worship gatherings and ministry that avoided or reduced those barriers. Well, this model, sometimes referred to as the launch model, because church worship services are launched continues to be a predominant North American model, many church planting leaders have indicated that the methods of launch don't have the same traction as decades ago. Rather than a pure launch style model, church planters are recognizing the need to have a missionary presence in the community before launching a gathering. This often involves learning how to do community engagement and develop this, and development. This is especially important in cities like Houston, Toronto, Miami, and others with communities with large number of non-Christian immigrants, which is so interesting that they list Houston, which is often referred to as the buckle on the Bible Belt. Very
Right.
interesting. Then the fourth observation. So the third observation is a move from a service launch model to a community engagement model. The fourth observation is embracing new metrics or a new scorecard and then new types of church planners. And this is so crazy. But he says, Daniel Yang says that in the 1990s and early 2000s, church planters were from Bible colleges or they were youth pastors moving in to plant churches. But today, local congregations are creating training pipelines for their newest generation of church planters. In other words, the pool of church planters in the 90s and early 2000s were seminarians. They were Bible college students,
Mhm.
seminary students that were coming out that had gone to Bible college to learn, or they'd gone to seminary to get a missiology degree. They were going to put that in effect when they came out of seminary, and they're going to plant a church. Daniel Yang says the trend is moving toward and will continue toward that actually churches are going to actually do the training at a local level, and that the new crop of church planters are actually going to come. They're going to emerge from those from those places.
Well, and I thought that was interesting because what I'm kind of reading into that just a little bit is the training pipeline comes from the local church, but also the church planters
Mm-hmm.
living in their communities, whatever,
Yep.
are now those are starting to emerge, which is what he talks about previously in the third
Yep.
point, which
Yep.
was instead of going in the service oriented launch model, it's more of kind of more of like a
Missional
missionary.
engagement.
Yeah, it's more of living like a missionary where you go in, you create community presence, you build connections, relationships, and then out of that, you're instead of being, like you said, a seminarian, you're trained locally on how to be
How to be a
missionary
missionary.
living,
Yeah.
right? And so then all of a sudden that starts producing the launch and also kind of the metric and the scorecard, I think, is important there because it's not about how many people show up at a launch service or the service oriented model per
Yeah.
se. It's now.
This inception of the church, like the inception of the church is we're going to do a lot of background. We're going to get a launch team, and the inception of the church is going to be, and this is a model that's like, I mean, this is comes out of the 1980s. This is the Rick Warren Saddleback deal. This is ARC. This is, whatever. It's this idea that says we're going to get this team together, and then and the inception of the church is going to be boom. It's going to be this service format. We're here. We're having services now. There's a church here. And
Yes.
he's saying, no, it's going to actually become that there's going to be missional integration, and there's going to be connection and relationship that's going to produce massive amounts of underground organic fruit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, which again goes back to if you're depending on institutions to do all the sending and whatever, and I do think it's one of the things about our movement, Ken, has been, certainly there's some element of that, but that's kind of what our movement has been church planters raising up from within and being
Mm-hmm.
sent out. I do think, we've been that service oriented, going to community, launch a church. And again, we're not saying that that can't be, and this is
Yeah.
just an observation from what he's saying
Yeah.
of,
We're not saying anything. Actually,
correct. We're
Chris,
just we're
our movement is actually just it's the North American model. Like
yeah,
it's all
yeah.
denominations. This is the way they've done it. This
And I
is
love what he said. And I love what he said early on was we respect, we honor, we pay tribute to those that have gone before and it's been effective
100%.
and it's worked. And so there's no slight there. It's just evaluating where we are and where we're headed, what's going on, how we do things, and maybe what worked in night. Again, we're closer to 2050 than we are 1980, and the things that we're looking to the future. The way
So good,
we're already starting to see the things that worked even early 2000s
bro.
are
It
not working. You know, the mega church, the number of mega churches, it's like cut in half since COVID. And
Right.
so we're already seeing some of those trends start to play. So do you wanna jump to the conclusion so we have some time to really kinda dive
Yeah.
into this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and you know what's I'll tell you something, it's interesting because, um, the, it's really interesting if you just wanna look into this in a way, man, kinda look into check out for our listeners, um, it was about a month ago that the Akron mayor, kicked off the demolition
Yeah. Right,
of
right, right, right.
right, of what was the Akron Baptist Temple. It was, I've got I don't know if I sent it to you, but I had a picture of a, vacated, empty, deserted former megachurch,
Yeah,
Akron Baptist Temple. And so anyway, the implications of all that. But I do think that's important. And Chris, I think you make a good point, and I think it is a good point for us to recognize that you know what? There were a lot of really good churches. The church I planted, I mean, let's just be honest, right?
yeah,
The church that
yeah.
I planted in 20, in 2000, golly, that's so crazy. How could it be? Jeez. The
You're
church that
old.
I know, man. Holy cow. Anyway, so I planted a church in the early 2000s,
Mhm.
in the Dayton area. And the church was built on, we had a couple of meetings. We had 2 weeks worth of meetings where we got together and I cast vision and we prayed about it and whatever. And by within a month, we had our first service going.
Yeah,
And and it's been tough sledding at times. I wish we'd have done some things different, but I think that there are many churches that we could point at and say, you know what? They showed up and they put found a building or storefront, put a sign out and started having church, and there's a church there. And we're so thankful for that. But what Daniel Yang is talking about in this article is the 2050 factor is changing some things.
sure.
And what worked may not work. And so so in conclusion, some of these trends and subsequent ideas are responses to where things are headed or a perceived a
Yes.
perceived outcome. And so what this article, I think what Daniel Yang does in this article and what I think Lifeway Research and the Wheaton College, the Billy Graham Center and the North American Mission Board, I think they're referring to the Southern Baptist Convention. I think that what they're doing is, I think that they're talking about and creating solutions to a problem or solutions intended to get ahead of a problem.
Yes.
And so, and now, look, although the Mobilized Church Network, we believe that there's a need to be aware of shifts and we need to be ready to address them. I think it's important for us to say at this particular juncture, as we start now we're going to start discussing, this is what we think.
Yes.
We've been discussing our, up to this point, we've been making our observations of their observations.
Right.
We've been
Right.
making our commentary on their observations. From here on out, we're going to make our own observations and maybe even as a counter argument, not a counter argument, but a counter to their solutions.
Yes.
And
Yeah, some of the information is the information, right? So
yes,
the demographer, it is what it is, and the trends are where they're at. What we're gonna address and discuss is the conclusions that Yang and others
yes,
who are missiologists
yep,
in their ranks, some of the things that they're making. 'Cause I think this is really important, Ken, and I'll be just really transparent. Something that I even kinda wrestled with early on in this process was kind of there was a part of me that was kind of addressing what we were seeing, where we could see, culture moving towards and whatever. And the problem with chasing trends is you're always behind.
always.
You're
Yeah,
you're
that's what we're
always
getting ready to talk about right here.
you're
Yeah,
yeah, and so I always kind of just wrestled with that of like, man, it's like, it's like the guy that right now he's wearing the skinny jeans and getting up and preaching. Well, that was great 10 years ago, but
yeah.
that's not
I
really
walk
the
into
trend.
Target and I don't even see anybody looking like that.
Let me rephrase that. It wasn't great 10 years ago, but
No,
I'm just
it was
saying
never great, but
it would be never great for me to do
it
that,
was
probably do that.
relevant. It was an attempt at relevance, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Which, by the way, JD Greer, I love JD Greer's statement. JD Greer said it's actually not a desire to be relevant as much as it is to throw off the irrelevancy of suit and ties. And
Ooh.
he's and he says
Ooh.
and he says, but the skinny jeans, he said the skinny jeans and the flannel shirt and the beanie have become a reflex suit of sorts where people are actually walking into these places seeing this ultra trendiness that doesn't even really exist in the secular culture. So
Right.
stinking good. But anyway,
Which
all
I
right,
think
all
is really critical towards
right.
authenticity of this,
Yeah,
the millennials, Gen Z, the authenticity piece, I think
yeah.
is really a critical component of that. So, all right, so let's get to
All
our
right. So I
conclusions.
like this statement, the statement that's made that demographics aren't destiny,
Yes.
because it hints at the idea that there's a biblical missional principle that could have a level of immunity to change trends. And I think
Yeah,
what we try to do is we personally believe that there are core principles that innately address these issues.
absolutely.
So while church planting is a means of missional advancement, okay? So I think this is key right here.
Absolutely.
I believe that church planting is a means of missional advancement. Church planting models will always lag behind the trends.
Always.
This is the reason that church planting models are really more styles and systems that focus on developing an effective approach. So, like, what are they talking about? Well, what they're saying is the 2050 factor is going to change things. It's going to demographically going to change the face of America. It's going to change the socioeconomic and the socio-political, all of those socio-religious structures and whatever, the worldview is going to be so dramatically different that we got to get ahead of the curve. We have to have a product. And I think this is the key. They're trying to have it, I believe, a church planting product that's
Yes.
going to address some of these things. And so the goal, of course, is to do the mission in ways that effectively reach people. But often, as this article from Yang highlights, they tend to focus heavily on the trending data and the demographics that would hinder or help the effort of church planting.
It's almost like they're trying to come up with the 2030 version of the 1980 Saddleback Sam,
Oh, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make there.
right?
They're trying to come up with, so what is the next 1980 moment?
What is the next Saddleback Sam? What is the next, right? And that's where what we're saying is the core values and the core principles of missional living deals with all of that and the expressions. There may be, if as long as you have disciples that are living on mission and they're making disciples, there should be the bubbling up of missional overflow. There will also be, Ken, the sending out.
Yes.
And here's the deal. If people are living on mission in their community, right? Wherever they're at,
Yeah.
whatever their oikos, whatever their sphere of influence, wherever God gives them and places influence in them, or even where maybe God opens up a door for them to go to. When you're living on mission in that place, you don't have to try to figure out how do you address the demographic, the core
Bro.
principles. This is why we believe it so strongly, because the core values and the core principles that Jesus gave us are applicable. We just talked about this to a pastor recently. The principles are applicable whether you do it rural,
Yeah.
urban,
Yeah.
metropolitan, foreign, where you can take these principles and go apply them
Yeah.
anywhere. You don't have to look at it and try to say, okay, what are the demographics? What are the, what's the kind of person that we're trying to reach? If you have people that are embedded in their community, they're naturally going to be connected
Yeah.
to,
So,
to
all
the
right. So let me,
community.
so I think this is so core. This is so key, Chris. And Jay Jones hits this. He said, when our churches are leader centric, we're forced to pick demographic market to reach.
Yes, that's
But,
so
but when,
good.
But when we're decentralized as mobilized disciples, we'll
There
reach
you
people as
go.
diverse as they are dispersed. And I think if we have a
So
kingdom
good.
saturated culture, then we will have people that are reaching people that
Bro,
are
you're getting me fired up, bro.
right? We're going to have people that are going to reach people, and we're going to find people of peace. And those
Yes.
people of peace may be very demographically different than us. Okay, Chris, when I left your former church that you helped plant, okay, when
Yeah.
I preached there just a few weeks or several weeks now ago, a couple months ago, when I was standing there talking to the daughter, the daughters of the Congolese pastor, and
Sure.
I said, Lord, you promised us that we would have a multicultural, not multicultural. We believe there's one culture; it's kingdom culture. You promised
Yes.
us that we would have a multi-ethnic church. I've told this story. We had 2 days later. That was on Sunday. On Tuesday, a
Yeah.
Pentecostal Congolese immigrant knocked on my front door.
Amazing.
And I have connected. There's a young man in our congregation that was raised in Malawi by a missionary
Mhm.
family. You and I preached in Malawi. Okay.
Yeah.
That young man is now connecting with these Congolese immigrants and is working on helping foster a connection. But guess what? These Congolese immigrants are going to reach the diverse demographic of our area.
There
We
you
don't
go.
have to create we don't have to create a church planting model to try to figure out how are we going to have multi-ethnic success. What we have to do is to have a kingdom saturated vision that results in finding persons of peace that then go and open the door to their various demographics. Those are principles that I don't care what the 2050 factor does. I don't care what the
Right.
2080 factor does. I believe that's timeless.
Absolutely, and we can bemoan the fact of, millennials, Gen Z, and all the statistics about faith and all that kind of stuff, but the reality is, if we have young missionaries living on mission, embedded in their world, and we train them on the principles and the concepts of disciple making, they're gonna be able to articulate the value system of the kingdom for their culture, just like we're
So
able to
good.
articulate the value
So
system
good.
of the kingdom in our culture. And I love what Jay said. I do think, Ken, I do think we have been so heavily focused on, and again, I believe in sending out church planners. I'm not against that, but when it's been so heavily weighted on leader centric
Yes.
and
Yeah.
less weighted.
We got to find a minister. We got to find a pastor, a preacher. We got to find a licensed minister to go to a town, which I know,
Right.
man, people may be
And
like,
I honor all of our missionaries, all of our church planners. It's not easy. There's a lot of other things that they could be doing. I know some tremendous church planners that could be doing a lot of other things, whatever. So we certainly honor that. We're not I think that should be a part of the body. That should be a part of the church that happens. But it shouldn't be so heavily weighted that that's the way that we launch and plant the major main way that we launch and plant
yeah, like
churches.
that is the way, right?
That's the way. What we've talked about and what we feel like is the kingdom way, the apostolic way, is you get people, everyday missionaries living on mission. And as they live on mission, they go into those places, missional overflow starts to bubble up. You start to identify, we're co-laborers with him, bro. I believe God will lead us into those places. God will connect us with a Congolese man. God will connect us with demographics that we could never reach. Our mission at Rossford was because of people living on mission. They had an open door, and we've had unbelievable connections through that. That comes as the byproduct, not of somebody saying, hey, I'm going to go be the leader of this church. It was just people living on mission.
Mhm.
And when we've said, if we're going to have the revival that God wants us to have in these last days that we're living in right now, it's going to demand every person living on mission, not just, Yang's view of
Yeah.
of how we're going to be the next Saddleback.
Isn't it interesting that isn't it interesting that even from what I'm going to do is by the way, I'm going to
Yeah,
reach out to Daniel Yang and just see if we can have a conversation with him
yeah,
to get his personal reflections on this
Yeah.
and see if, see if is he coming from, because there's not a lot of outcomes. Like he's making observations and then we're making observations and then we're not drawing our conclusions opposed to him. We're not even drawing our conclusions, Chris, with any kind of opposition to like like any institutional effort. Jesus said, if you're not against me, you're for me. And
Right.
and this is the problem is sometimes when you're passionate about something, it can come off as like a little bit of antipathy. We don't have any antipathy against any
No,
kind
not
of,
at all.
uh, it's just that what we're saying is in the context of this conversation, we believe that there is a certain amount of intrinsic immunity that is trend immunity
Yeah.
that's built into this. So our thought is that the answer to the 2050 factor is to say that if we can embrace a church emerging from principle
Mhm.
rather than a church built for model, we will always be relevant and ahead of the trends.
Man.
That's me. That's my those are my words. That's not Daniel Yang. That's just you and I, Chris. That's us making an observation. If we can embrace a church emerging from, a
Yes.
church emerging out of principle rather than a church built for model, we will always be relevant and ahead of the trends.
Absolutely, which I think goes back towards Ken. A lot of times we try to build something and then ask the Lord to come and bless it. And I think this really requires being spirit led and God bringing us into places that He's moving on people and He's doing the work. We just become co-laborers where we walk with Him in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I see. And of course, I understand some cultural things or whatever. And again, one of the challenges as I was thinking through this morning was, right now there are still some places that when you, particularly here in the Midwest, when you live on mission, you start having conversations. There's still a pretty deeply built in perception that when God starts dealing with you, that you're going to go to a building, right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
so I understand church
Yeah.
planters who are wrestling through, you're building connections, you're trying
Mhm.
to be a disciple maker, you're trying
Bro,
to live on mission, and you have people that are like, "Man, that's awesome. I love what you're saying. What time's your service?" And church
bro,
planters like, you know what
listen.
I'm saying?
So Nate Rios and I had this conversation, right? He's
Yeah,
in Oxford, Mississippi. Uh, which, golly, it's a beautiful town.
never
Unbelievable.
been there.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. The Ole Miss University is one of the most beautiful campuses.
I've heard that.
It's unbelievable. I'm serious when I tell you, I was blown away. It's unbelievable. Beautiful. Oh, and he was talking about the fact that, and it's expensive. There's only about 25,000 people in the town, about 23,000 students. And he made this statement that one of the reasons why they were in a gym, they had a small building, they went to a gym, and one of the reasons why they're paying what would appear to be seem like exorbitant amounts of money to rent where they're at is because in that community, they would not be legitimized
Mhm.
if they did not have some form of structural building centric, like you said, what time's your service or where's your church at? And
Yeah.
Chris, I love what it says. I love what, like, even Yang, I like what he said when he said, he said, rather than a pure launch style model, church planters are recognizing the need to have a missionary presence in the community before launching a gathering. And so here's the thing, like I would almost say that what we're saying is if we could embrace a church emerging from principle rather than a church built for,
Yeah.
then maybe what you could do is you could say, look, maybe we could have that trigger point. Maybe we could have that deal where we say, okay, how are you going to go in and be a missionary presence? How are you going to go in and find persons of peace? How are you going to, and
Yes.
then, let the launch, the
Yeah.
service, let that be something like that's not like a wrong thing.
Sure.
We
Sure.
both pastor churches that have a Sunday gathering. We both pastor churches that have websites with church times and so on and so forth. So
Right.
we're not being hypocritical to that. What we're saying is that the missional methodology shouldn't be, let's figure out how to get somebody, we're going to launch them into the community so big that the community knows that they're there, and then the missional methodology is going to be Sunday after Sunday we're going to invite people to come, and eventually we're going to grow a church out of that. What we're saying is, what would happen if we had a church emerging from a multiplying missional disciple making culture
Yeah.
that then launched out of that?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's definitely, and I think the thing is again, going back to the trend chaser thing and all that kind of stuff, is the principles. Like, let's stay true to the principles. And I think where we've come to, Ken, is, again, we're practitioners, not theorists. I think that as we practice these things, one of the things I love in reading the missional efforts in the book of Acts was it the focus of going to a community
Mm-hmm.
was reaching people, not launching churches.
It's very true.
And
Bringing the gospel to the people of Ephesus, bringing the gospel to the people of Corinth. Yeah.
and out of that, as right, as he found people that we would call disciplable, and God started moving on them, what you're talking about, it emerged, and out of that missional effort emerged the church body, right?
Mm.
And I still believe that regardless of what the demographics are, I still believe regardless of the
Yeah.
cultural trends and whatever,
Yeah.
I still believe that methodology is what works.
Dude, Chris, that's so good. I'm going to post, yeah, that's just so good. I'm going to post, on on the website, or I'll post on Facebook. But these are three final questions. We're not going to have time, really, honestly, to really dive into them. But I posted on Facebook. Maybe you can get them in on our other frameworks.
Yep, I'll do it.
But we have three final questions, and I think these are three final questions that I think we need to ask ourselves. I think they're questions of humility. I think one thing that you and I want to communicate, and we're pretty intense, radical kind of people, is that I think one of the things that we want to communicate is that, and we say this often, we don't, like you just said, we're not theorists, we're practitioners. We're not the type of people that say we found the answers, come listen to us.
Yeah,
What we're saying is we're asking questions. We're asking questions, and those questions are trying to help lead us to a place that says, how can we do something that, if we're all trying to do this, if we're all going for the same thing, right?
yeah,
If organizations, I think the micro networks, need to be able to be humble enough to say to the organization, not, we found the answer and you people need to listen to us. Or organizations need to be humble enough to say, you're just a bunch of puny micro organizations. I think what has to happen is there needs to be a deep level of humility that happens across the board, where we're able to ask some questions. These are three final questions we want to ask. We don't have time really to discuss them, but these are three questions. Ask yourself these questions. Number one, what would it look like in the coming years if we employed these church planting paradigms? What would it look like if we had a church planting structure that came out of missional overflow, where churches emerged from, hey, we've got an area over here that is either unchurched or underchurched. We have some people there. We're going to unleash the missional multiplying disciple making model, and a church is going to emerge out of that. What would it look like in the coming years if we employed that as a church planting model? The second question is this the most effective way to reach the increasing percentage of truly unchurched or lost people in our society?
yeah,
In other words, is a particular model a more effective model? It's not what we're biased toward. It's not what we like more. It's not what we're in love with. It's, look, at the end of the day, there's some very pragmatic metrics is it going to be the most effective way to reach lost people? And
Sure.
then the third question is, how can we appropriate this as a core church planting emphasis, where the idea of planting a church is focused on unleashing people to engage a community and begin multiplying disciple making engine that reproduces into solid congregations? How can we appropriate this as a church planting emphasis? And what would that look like if that began to be employed? Those are our three final questions. They're questions for the consideration of our audience, and they're questions that we ask ourselves in prayer and in humility.
Absolutely, man. I think that's a I think, uh, that's the thing about this about all of this stuff, Ken, is, again, I don't wanna beat a dead horse, but the practitioner, versus theorist, asking these questions, digging through these challenges that we're facing, and as I read all of these things, Ken, it just reinforces the importance of kind of the direction that we feel and we feel like God is heading us, particularly in the hour that we're living in. It what it feels like is a divine setup.
Yes, it really does. It really does.
So,
Like
like,
the
what
answer is organic, right? Like it's
the people that are wringing their hands about the future or whatever is really kind of a sentimentality. It's
oh,
nostalgia
that's so
of
good, so
the
true.
way I see things. But if we can look through it through kingdom eyes, in a lot of ways, what I see the Lord doing is pulling down a lot of our a lot of the way that we viewed how the mission is done and getting us back to the true apostolic methodology.
Yeah,
And again, in that, there's going to be buildings, there's going to be services, there's going to be different expressions in all of this, but undergirding all of that, this is what we're trying to say, I think, today, Ken. This is why all things are neutral, right? Undergirding all of that are the principles of missional living, everyday disciples
mm,
living on mission.
mm-hmm.
That's undergirding that. And if we get that piece right, this is what we've been saying. If we get that piece right, the rest of the stuff takes care of itself,
Mm.
regardless of the demographics, regardless of the cultural shift, regardless of where the location is. The
That's it.
undergirding piece of missional living, everyday disciples, that's what will make everything that will lead to the expressions in all of these different places. So I think we've kind of focused
Yeah.
on the end, when what
Mhm.
we really need to do is focusing on the foundation of all of it.
Eternal kingdom principles are timeless, which
Yes.
means which means they will have immunity to trends.
Yes.
And the question is, can we fall in love with timeless kingdom principles that help us pivot from the previous models that we fell in love with that worked in an era where it was our glory days?
Yes.
And and I think that it does take humility for that, Chris. I think just as you mentioned, there are. I think it is like there's a humility that says ecclesiologically, you and I both believe that there needs to be strong apostolic governmental leadership in a local church. Hebrews
100%.
13.
Yeah.
We believe that there is forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. We're not referring, none of this, what we're talking about today, has anything to do with ecclesiological structure.
Right.
All of this refers to missiological methodology. We're not saying, well, what we need to do, what we need to do is we need to move to, we need to move to a new ecclesiological structure, which is home church. Or no, that's not. Don't overlay one thing that we're saying today into
Correct.
an ecclesiological context. We're not talking ecclesiology today. We believe, that's why we said, we reinforced the gathering, the Sunday gathering. You cannot have a kingdom New Testament church without having gathering.
Right.
You have to. It's biblical. But the Bible says by one Spirit are you baptized into one body. The ecclesia is the gathering of the called out ones. So
Sure.
ecclesiology says you have to have leadership, you have to have structure, you have to have gathering. Okay. What we're talking about today is upholding a high kingdom New Testament ecclesiology with a high kingdom New Testament biblical missiology.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
can we have both of those, hold both of those in the highest esteem and beat the odds.
There you go. There you go. I know we went just a little bit long today. We had a ton of great comments as always, and we didn't get to many of those because we knew that we had a lot of information that we wanted to share with you, and kind of sped through this. I mean, I think this is something we could spend a lot more time on, but we definitely a great conversation today, Ken. Appreciate everybody chipping in, and yeah, definitely we need to reach out to Daniel Yang
Let's do it.
and get his thoughts on some of these things. So appreciate everybody joining in the conversation today. If you would like more information, Ken, we've kind of reached a point making some shifts and change in the network, and we're at a point where we potentially could take on some new pastors that are interested in creating and cultivating a missional culture like we talked about today, everyday disciples living on mission where they learn, live, work, and play. And if that is something that interests you, go check out the dillinghamgroup.org. We have an assessment that you can fill out. And we would love just to connect with you and see how we can help in this process. Again, we don't have the answers. We're just trying to pursue the mission, the purpose that God has given. So we would love to connect with you. And again, social media sites, all that good stuff. Check it out. So thank you for joining us today for this great conversation. We look forward to coming back to you next Tuesday around 10 o'clock. Until then,